Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host as always, Tommy Brzee. It is August 29th, a Friday. We're one day out from college football being fully underway, but we got college football to talk about already. We had a couple of great games yesterday. We'll talk about Boise State getting absolutely boat raced by South Florida, Nebraska surviving one for once, and then we'll get into some final thoughts about week one as we get into those big time games. Then we got some hot takes for you for the 2025 season. I have about 6 that I feel pretty confident in, a couple a little bit more crazy than others, but we'll break those down for you today. Got some best bets for you in week one, definitely some ones that I like a lot more than others. And then we'll get to a little bit of a weekend catch up, some different things, including a little talk about Lee Corso before we get out of here on today's show. But let's go ahead and jump in. Let's talk about all of the games that went on yesterday, and then we'll move on to some final thoughts about week one, including a couple of updates around the injury department there. But let's go ahead and jump in and let's talk about the one that stole the show yesterday. It was at 5:30 actually yesterday, so a little bit on the earlier side. But South Florida dominates Boise State 34-7. This was really something. This was not what I expected. A very slow start by both of these teams. Neither offense really got anything going. And then a massive fake punt call by Alex Golish in South Florida. A great throw by Lachlan Hewlett. Made a big-time play to Keyshawn Singleton. And South Florida just didn't stop from there. Byron Brown, if he's healthy, he is going to be one of the best, maybe the best quarterback in the group of 5 this year. An incredibly talented runner. Not necessarily a scary passer, but very, very capable in that department. This team is going to be very, very tough to beat. South Florida obviously is staring down a very tough path when you talk about the schedule that they have to go up against, have Florida and Miami the next 2 weeks, but the reality is, especially with maybe the new strength of schedule metric that they're using in the CFP, maybe they can lose both those games. And as long as you keep it at the very least a little bit interesting, you're still very much in the conversation for the CFP. They needed this one, and they absolutely got it. Now, Boise State absolutely can bounce back from this. They are not going to be a terrible team. That being said, it was very, very clear from start to finish that South Florida was not scared of that pass game by any means, and not many teams really were a year ago. The difference was you had Ashton Genty in the backfield, so stacked boxes didn't necessarily matter, and they had to stack them with 8 guys, not 6, and still be able to stop the run. They got to figure out what the run game is going to look like. I think they have to lean on Sire Gaines just a little bit more than they did yesterday, and I think they have to find a way to open up some passing lanes on the back end because South Florida was flying downhill with no problem, and there wasn't really a big play to speak of from Boise State in the pass game. So as of right now, I would view South Florida as the CFP favorite from the group of 5. Obviously, still very early. It'll decide really what happens in the next 2 weeks. If they find a way to beat one of Florida or Miami, they're far and away the favorite, obviously. Even if they keep it within 10 or 14 points in both those games, I think they're firmly in the lead for the CFP right now. Obviously, quite a bit of time to go. Byron Brown has to stay healthy, has to stay on the field, but this is a really special team with a lot going in their favor going forward, and I think it's a team that absolutely could be the one representing the group of 5 in the CFP. A massive win for them, and Boise State still everything on the table, but definitely a lot more of a tightrope walk now. Nebraska won a one-score game, and I know this one did not look pretty by any means, especially early on. A whole lot of red in this matchup all over the place in Arrowhead yesterday, but Malcolm Herzog makes the play of the day, a massive pick at the very end of this game to get the win for Nebraska. It was ugly, there's no doubt about that. Here's the reality of Nebraska football. You can't get mad at winning one-score games. You've been so bad in that department over the past couple of years. This was about getting the win. I understand that there is a lot of things that you're going to have to figure out, and we'll talk about that here in a second, but the reality is you found a way to go 1-0. You move forward against a schedule that is very favorable. You got 2 games to figure a lot of things out, and then you got Michigan. You win that game, you're still very much on schedule. This game was ugly, no doubt about that. You find a way to win it, and you move forward. I think that's the big thing for Nebraska. Now, what I will say is Dylan Rhule played really good football. I don't think he played bad football in this game, but the reality of the matter is they don't scare people in the pass game, especially downfield. I don't think the receivers are quite to the level that you would like them to be. Now, I do think Neziah Hunter and Dane Key have added to that wide receiver room, but doesn't seem to be quite as scary as they want it to be. And I do think Dylan Rhule does struggle at times to push the ball downfield the way that they need it. I think this team has to find a way to be more explosive if they're going to be scary in those big-time games that they're going to have to win throughout the season against Michigan, against Penn State down the road. They're going to have to win big time deep balls are going to have to hit 50 or 40-yard plays down the field. If they're going to do that, they hit one in this game. They hit a big play to Isaiah Hunter for a touchdown, and that was about it. So they have to find a way to be more dynamic on the offensive side of the ball. I think they're going to be able to put together a nice season. I think Matt Rhule is going to be able to play good football. He's going to have to play great football if they're going to be able to make a CFP run, and that mainly predicates on his ability to put the ball down the field in good circumstances and pretty consistently down the field. And in this game, Cincinnati was not all that scared of it, and Nebraska wasn't really trying to do it as much as I think they probably should. But on the other side, the Nebraska defense did look the part. There were a couple of scrambles from Brendan Sorsby that did kind of get them, which is something to watch definitely going forward, especially against a Michigan team with an athletic guy like Bryce Underwood. But the reality is that is going to be a good unit. That's going to be a unit that is going to give them a chance to win just about every game that they play. So it's hard not to be a little bit worried about Nebraska coming out of that game. Definitely not a team that I feel fully confident in going forward, and one that obviously wants to make it to the CFP. Don't feel great about that right this second. All that being said, Nebraska, you won a one-score game, and I think that's a win at the end of the day. You have 2 games to figure some things out. You have a Sharon Moore-less Michigan coming to town in a little bit, and it is going to be a massive, massive game. Everything is still on the table for this team. There was a very real world where Cincinnati was able to make that play in the end zone over Malcolm Herzog and win this one, or at least come down, kick a field goal, force overtime, and then maybe Nebraska's looking at 0-1. At the very least, you're looking at 1-0, and you continue to move forward, hoping that you can take advantage of the schedule that's in front of you. Some other just general notes about the Thursday game. Rutgers was able to escape over Ohio. Parker Navarro put on an absolute show for Ohio, but Rutgers was able to escape in that one. They avoid disaster, and frankly, I don't think it's going to be a great year regardless, but Ohio's going to be a solid team over there in the MAC. NC State held off ECU. This was going to be a game that was always going to be a little bit weird, but came away really impressed with CJ Bailey. Although they only scored 24 points at NC State, thought he really handled the offense very well, and I do think that he's going to continue to get better, and I don't think they're going to be a great team, but definitely a team that can sneak up on someone any given week. Bo Peribola looked the part for Missouri. Sam Horn did get hurt in his very first play in this game. Missouri rolls to a 61-6 win over Central Arkansas, as they should, but Bo Peribola looked the part. I do think he's going to be the starter going forward. Sam Horn getting injured doesn't help by any means, but I do think Bo Peribola put on a show in this game and will definitely be the starter for Missouri going forward. Obviously, a tough finish for Sam Horn to this QB battle. Not the way you want this thing to finish, but a very, very talented player in Bo Peribola, and we'll see what Missouri can do the rest of the way. This is probably the easiest game they had, but still a very manageable schedule that they can make a run against, no doubt about it. Another quarterback injury was in Wisconsin. They seem to still be Wisconsin, a little bit confused, trying to figure out who they are, and Billy Edwards went down in this one, their starting quarterback. Going to be a tough time if they don't have him on the field. They were able to get a win over Miami of Ohio, but you got Alabama coming to town here pretty soon. You're going to Alabama's town here pretty soon, actually, and that's going to be a whole lot tougher. Without Billy Edwards, it was going to be plenty tough with him already. Minnesota was able to get off the ground, top Buffalo 23-10. Far from perfect, I can tell you that, but at the end of the day, with a new quarterback taking over, not the worst thing in the world. I do think Buffalo is going to be a really fun team in the MAC, head by Pete Lembo. And then Darian Mensah looked the part for Duke in this game. Definitely was a little bit all over the place in the first half. They only scored 10 points in the first half against Elon. They pulled away to win 45-17. He threw for almost 400 yards in that game. So everyone looked the part, no doubt about it. There were definitely a lot of scares in this weekend, but no outright crazy upsets except for, I guess, South Florida, if you count that as a crazy upset. But a good Thursday night. I think tonight's going to be incredible, and then obviously tomorrow is going to be downright special. And let's move on to tomorrow. Why don't we? Texas at Ohio State. Just some final thoughts here. A lot of people are on Texas in this game. It is down to a 1.5-point spread in favor of Ohio State, which essentially means it probably would be favored towards Texas on a neutral field. I don't know. It's an absolute toss-up game to me. I did pick Texas by, I believe, 24-20. It's margins. One way or the other, I could see it going either direction. I could see either team winning by 14 points, if I'm being totally honest. It is going to be all over the place. Also, there's going to be about 13 future 30 future NFL players that will play in this game. It is going to be all over the field every single second. You will have someone that is going to play in the NFL touching the football. It is a special group of players. There is so much to like about this game. There are some big-time matchups to watch. I think there are 4 players in this game that I believe are the very best at their position in the entire country. When you talk about Caleb Downs, Jeremiah Smith, Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill, I think those guys are the premier player at their position going into this season, and they get to face off in week 1. So enjoy this one. Unless you're a Longhorn or Buckeye fan, then try your best to keep your heart rate down, and we'll see what happens at the end of it. But at the end of the day, there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be spectacular plays, and it's going to be an awesome one in one of the best venues in the entire sport. LSU at Clemson. This game will inform so many narratives around so many different things, whether it's LSU and Brian Kelly's future there, Dabo Swinney, and will he ever get back up to the top at Clemson? Does Clemson need to start looking elsewhere? None of it will really matter at the end of the year, at least if these teams handle the business the way I expect them to, but a couple of interesting kind of deeper questions about this is, can LSU's defensive line disrupt their run game? Can they get a way to get after Cade Klubnik, get after some of these young running backs in, get after an offensive line that is very, very talented, very deep, very experienced, but also when you look at them against defensive lines from the SEC, from the elite conferences in the country, they do struggle. They do struggle with outright speed, outright athleticism. That is something that LSU does have. When you add in Patrick Payton, you add in Jack Pyburn, when you add in all of these talented players on the interior, you're going to have a lot of ability. And there's going to be a chance here for maybe the Clemson offensive line not to get outright beat, but maybe not dominate this game the way that some Clemson fans are expecting. And then the other side, LSU's offensive line has to rise to the occasion. There are about 3 or 4 NFL bodies on the Clemson defensive line, and if you don't step up to the plate, you're going to have a very long day running the ball, which means Garrett Nussmeier is probably going to have a very long day. One of the very interesting matchups to me, and one of the things I continue to think about as we get closer, is Mansour Deline, the cornerback for LSU, has to be really good in this game. I think he has to, I don't want to say totally shut down, but at the very least, take one of these receivers relatively offline. Whether that's Brian Wesco, whether that's TJ Moore, find a way to limit the options for Cade Klubnik, find a way to cut off the side of the field as best you can in this game. And then for on the other side of the ball for LSU, Harlem Berry is a name that I think is really interesting. The freshman running back, this kid can fly. If he finds a crease in that Clemson defense, he's going to do exactly what Jaden Blue did to that Clemson defense in the playoff last year. He is absolutely someone that's going to make an impact in this game, and I think he's going to make an impact all year for this team, but there could be a moment or two where Harlem Berry gets the ball in his hands and you don't see anything but the back of him because he's heading for 60 yards and a touchdown. Then we had Notre Dame at Miami. Just had to pick up this old picture because I absolutely loved it when I came across it. But at the end of the day, the question is, do people really think Miami can pull this out? I think there's a number of people that are starting to lean that direction as we get closer and closer to kickoff, whether it's not trusting CJ Carr or really believing that Carson Beck last year was just kind of a blip on the radar and we'll get back to the elite level that he was playing in 2023. The big thing I'm watching is the Notre Dame defensive line against the Miami offensive line. When you talk about the Notre Dame defensive line, you have Donovan Hinich. Bryce Young is an elite edge rusher that a lot of people will know the name of by the end of the season. Josh Onye, finally fully healthy. Junior Tuialamaka is going to be a great player coming off the edge for Notre Dame. And about 5 other guys that can factor into the equation for this defensive line against what I consider to be a top 5, top 10 offensive line in the entire country for Miami, led by obviously Francis Mauigoa. It is going to be a battle up front. And I think the reality is, if Notre Dame is able to get after Miami's offensive line, if they're able to slow down the run, Carson Beck's going to have a little bit of trouble, because if that's able to happen, Notre Dame can play the man coverage they love to play on the back end while still playing some safeties over the top and still having some of that security blanket, and that means there's a little bit tighter windows for Carson Beck to throw into. So I think it's going to be an incredible game. I think up front is where it's going to be decided, and then those quarterbacks. Does Kenny Minchey factor into the conversation for Notre Dame in the run game between Carson Beck or CJ Carr? Which one can maybe scramble for a couple of yards on a big third down? We've seen Carson Beck do it in the past. I think CJ Carr has that ability, but definitely he's going to be thrown into the fire here and have to answer a lot of questions very quickly. Going to be an awesome game, one that I'm kind of rethinking my pick on, if I'm being totally honest, but I'll roll with Notre Dame for the time being. Some other game updates for this weekend and going forward. Tim Keenan, the Alabama defensive tackle, will be out for the Florida State game. I believe they're without 4 starters going into this game. Sounds like he's going to have tightrope surgery on his ankle. We'll see how long that takes. It sounds like it's going to be multiple games. The hope is you can get him back for, I believe, September 27th when they head to Athens, Georgia to face off against Georgia. For Dylan Edwards, he's going to miss 1 or 2 games. There were some nasty rumors going out that he was going to leave Kansas State. He is sticking around. There is no problem there, but he is injured, and he's injured for at least the next 1 or 2 games. Likely keeps him out for a big-time game coming up. Definitely a tough loss for this football team. They should be okay. It does make their run game a little bit more bland, a little bit more predictable because this guy is such a game breaker. He keeps guys really, really honest. He can get out on the edge so quickly that when you have Joe Jackson back there, he can do some incredible things, but he's more of an in-between the tackles, a little bit more hard-nosed guy, while Dylan Edwards can get out on the edge and go for 60 yards. It definitely does kind of hamper them on offense. The question is, can they overcome it, at least for the time being, until he comes back? I think they can. It's just a little bit of a tightrope walk. There's no doubt about that. Another running back, Rhule finally got his waiver approved for this season. This is big news. This South Carolina team, I was very worried about the playmakers really around Lenora Sellers, both at wide receiver and running back. Rhule at running back makes that a lot nicer. He was a 1,000-yard rusher for Utah State last year. Very physical guy, absolutely someone that can add to this run game and make Lenora Sellers that much more scary in that read option game. So absolutely huge for South Carolina. Kind of expected this to happen, but took them quite a bit of time to let this guy know that he can play some football, but he officially can, and we'll get to see him this upcoming weekend and obviously going forward for the Gamecocks. And then Reese Vanderzee, the wide receiver for Iowa, sounds like he's going to miss about 5 or 6 games with an injury. This is a huge blow to an offense that really can't take too many blows to their pass-catching group. This is probably going to be the number one guy in this group this year, or at least was. Now you're going to miss him for 5 or 6 games, and you're going to have to figure out a way to make some offense over there in Iowa City. Going to be really tough without that guy on the football field. But a really nice first day of the weekend. You know, Thursday night football, always something that's a little bit hit or miss in the world of college football. I think we got the perfect day. We got one big-time upset with South Florida beating Boise State. We got Nebraska-Cincinnati going down to the wire, and then we got some weird, kind of sloppy football at times, but at least some very interesting football nonetheless, and it makes way for what I consider to be the best week one we have ever had. But we'll move forward to more of a season preview. I'll give my hot takes for this upcoming season. I got 6 of them here, 1 to do with the playoff, 1 to do with the Heisman, a couple more niche, and we'll talk about them all right after this, so stick with us.